And people grateful to be visiting with someone face to face.
Than other guys over here.
So it's nice to have everybody here with us the week before Thanksgiving. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Transportation Advisory Board of the Metropolitan Council. It is November 16th, 2022 and 12:35. Is there an approval of the agenda? Motion to approve the agenda?
Anderson?
Anderson moves approval.
Second.
Second, Gattell on approval of the agenda. Any further discussion on the agenda? All those in favor of adoption of the agenda as shown, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. What a great level of enthusiasm here right off the bat. Wait till we get to the regional solicitation. I can hardly stand it. Anybody here from the public that wishes to visit with a tab about a matter that's of concern to them? All right, seeing no one coming forward, not hearing anything, I'll move on to reports. It's that time of the year when Elaine wants us to start thinking about how to populate the executive committee. And I think I'll have Elaine circulate the statutory language, or maybe this is out of the bylaws.
It's out of the bylaws. Yeah.
Bylaws, as to how we populate that. But we need a couple of county board members, we need a Met Council member, and of course, some of the agencies are involved. Two members from the of cities of the first class, or one member from the cities of the first class, two from the remaining cities, citizen rep, and then one person representing the modal and remaining agency board members. So I'll have Elaine circulate that. Give that some thought if you'd like to serve on the exec committee, and add another hour and a half to your meeting on Wednesday, the middle of the month. I'd love to have have you all apply that are interested. We've got some new tab members and alternates here. I'm going to have the alternates go, and I see quite a few alternates here, but the new tab members that are here that we haven't had with us before, Riva Chambliss is an alternate here for Deb Barber from the Met Council. Riva, welcome. Thank you. And then Richard Hostel, an alternate for Bill Lindeke. Right, Richard, thank you for being here with us this afternoon. And then I'm going to start with Steve over here and have the alternates just introduce themselves as we go around the room.
Scott.
Scott, excuse me, Scott.
No problem. Scott Schulte, here for Matt Look today.
Go ahead. We got all the way around. We got past Riva, and Bill's here. Bill, you want to introduce yourself?
Bill Drosty, Metro Cities.
All right.
Kevin Burkhardt, alternate for Suburban Transit Association.
Thanks, Kevin. And Glenn?
Glenn Johnson, Citizen Rep D, in for Ash.
Okay. Thanks, folks. In the exec committee meeting today, we had a conversation that'll be much like the one we have here, I think, discussing what the TAC has recommended. Great work done by staff over the past year and a half or so. I think that distilled down into us doing some polling last meeting that helped us distill down things into some possibilities for the TAC so that they could think about how we were guiding them, I guess would be a good way to put it. And had three different scenarios that we had looked at and then sent those to them. And there was A, B1, B2. And as TAC analyzed it, they thought B1 and B2 were so similar that what they came back to us with was a recommendation that we look at scenario A, which has a little bit more funding allocated towards some highway extension projects, and B1, which provides a little bit broader distribution of funds and then has a little bit more trail-heavy, non-motorized emphasis to it. So we're going to get into that conversation. We had a good conversation at exec about that as well. And then one of the questions that we're going to have to answer, I think, right off the bat is, when we get into that portion of the discussion, is the recommendation from TAC that we consider over-programming at 12%. We've been historically over-programming at about 10%. That over-programming at 12% would mean we'd have an extra $3 million to work with. And it has been, as Member Geisler has pointed out in the exec committee, a good way of doing risk management, because some projects fall by the wayside and we seem to be able to manage well with the over-programming that we do in terms of getting everything accomplished. So keep in mind as we go through this effort today, we want to be thinking about regional priorities. There'll be conversations about projects, and once we get a baseline scenario picked, there may be some shifting there. As you all know, the last thing that we've done in this regional solicitation work is put that geographic balance lens on everything. But the regional priorities are the main thing and not individual projects. It's inevitable, I think, that we'll talk a little bit about individual projects today as we try to find that balance, but nonetheless, keep that regional prioritization at the top of your mind. Both of these scenarios, incidentally, deal with some of those regional priorities that we all care about. The preservation of existing systems is covered under either, both of those scenarios. The way safety is handled is pretty much equal in both scenarios. Equity, equally handled. Strategic capacity, I think it's going to boil down to what is the overarching thought of the group, what's the group preference when we get to the end of the day, because some of these regional priorities are embedded in both of the concepts. So that's it for me. I think that'll help us get kind of kick-started on things. And then I'm going to turn to the agency reports and start with MnDOT and Member Barnes. Thank you for being with us, Member Barnes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, is this working? Okay, just had
It
to double
is.
check, couldn't see the light. All right, I do have just a couple items. One, the reminder, the Corridors of Commerce program that we mentioned back in around September will, the solicitation ends the end of November. And as a reminder, that's a statewide program. It's a $200 million. It's about half to metro area and half outstate. So those applications, I know there are some that are coming in. So, and then I just want to do a quick update on the fatalities. I try to do it every few months here. As we stand now through November 13th, there's been 395 traffic deaths on our Minnesota roadways, which is 10% less than this time last year, but it's still about 20% more or 23% more than pre-COVID. So we're going down, but still up. Speed-related deaths are 33% less than last year, but again, about 20% higher than they are pre-COVID. So speed is still a factor. Motorcycle deaths is more significant. They are the highest they've been in a number of years, or about 20% higher than last year, but 86% higher than pre-COVID. So motorcycle accidents are significant. And pedestrian deaths are 30% or 37% lower than last year, as well as lower than the previous year. So the pedestrian death side is coming down, but still more than what we want. So just kind of a reminder from the safety side. This is many of the things that folks here have staff or deal with on a regular basis. We want to bring this down to zero. So other than that, Mr. Chair, that's all I have, unless there's questions from me.
All right, thanks, Member Barnes. Questions for Member Barnes?
Yes.
Member Dugan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, would you mind saying what the pedestrian deaths were again?
There was 33 out of the 395, which is 37% lower than this time last year, and as well as lower than even pre-COVID. So it is coming down. So
Thank you.
Good. Other questions for Member Barnes? Any other questions? All right, I don't see Todd Bewan here from MPCA. We'll move on to the MAC. Is Carl here?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, there he is. All right.
Not a lot going on. We're getting ready for the holidays. Next week, it's going to be a busy week for the airport. The one thing that we've been hearing is that Delta Airlines and their pilots are still negotiating, but the pilots have now authorized to strike. They've been operating under a contract since 2016, and they think it's time for a new contract. The good part about it is that they have to give 30-day notice. So at least the holiday Thanksgiving won't be involved in a walkout or a strike or a shutdown. So that's the only labor news coming from the airport. Everything else seems to be doing okay. We haven't had any major discussions about the light rail, incidents on light rail from our police and security department. So it seems like that issue's is working out as well as can be expected. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. Any questions for Member Crimmins relative to the airport operation? All right, then let's turn to Member Chambliss, sitting in for Deb Barber. Anything to report out from the Metropolitan Council, Member Chambliss?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of time in today's full agenda, we have a brief update. The Metro D-Line will launch December 3rd. I'm looking forward to that. The D-Line is an 18-mile bus rapid transit line connecting the Mall of America to the Brooklyn Center Transit Center. The line will serve more than 24 of new BRT stations and will also utilize existing Metro C-Line stations in downtown Minneapolis and Brooklyn Center. Funding from the regional solicitation was critical to delivering this project, totaling $35 million of regional solicitation federal funding, which was designated for the project's different expansion and modernization components. The council is looking forward to celebrating the launch day, and service will begin early at 4 a.m. on Saturday, December 3rd, with our ribbon cutting ceremony being held indoors at 10 a.m. at the Mall of America Transit Station. Community celebrations will be held at Juxtaposition Arts in North Minneapolis and at Veterans Park in Richfield from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And if you get a chance, I hope you can join us. Thank you.
All right, good. Thanks for that. I know I did see something the other day on the grand opening of it at the Mall of America. So thanks for that report out. That'll be a nice day. And then on to the Suburban Transit Authority. Oh, somebody have a question? No. Oh, here's Todd. Well, I'll handle Kevin Burkhardt reporting out for the Suburban Transit Authority members first. Member Burkhardt, go ahead.
Thank you. Chair and members of the board, for those of you not familiar with suburban transit providers, we have 4. Plymouth, SmartLink, Maple Grove Transit, Southwest Transit, and Minnesota Valley Transit Association. In the interest of brevity, today we've got quite a few things on the agenda. Our ridership is hovering around 40% for most of the system as far as when compared to pre-COVID levels. We are seeing growth in a lot of our on-demand service, and that is beyond, that's higher than pre-COVID levels. Plymouth has their Click and Ride, Maple Grove has their My Ride service, Southwest has their Prime on-demand service, and then MVTA has their MVTA Connect service. And so we are seeing a lot of success with that. And we continue to align our fleet utilization with the ridership and try and meet demand where we can find it with corporate utilization for reverse commutes and as well as special events. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Member Burkhardt. Any questions for Mr. Burkhardt, Member Burkhardt? All right, Member Bewan has arrived, and we'll see if he has anything to report out for the MPCA.
Sorry I'm late. A couple things to share. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing is about membership for MPCA. So I'm the alternate for MPCA, and I just wanted to let the tab know that our primary representative from the MPCA, Craig McDonald, has left the agency recently, and so we'll be working on filling that position. He was the Assistant Commissioner for Air and Climate, and he is moving over to Fresh Energy, and he's going to continue his efforts working on decarbonization in the industrial and agricultural sectors with that nonprofit. But anyway, so we're really pleased how Craig served with us, and we'll miss him, but we will be working on filling behind Craig. So if you know anyone who really wants to work on air and climate at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, send them our way. We'll be working on that filling. The second issue is that, and I think this will be interesting to the tab as we go into 2023, we're completing our biennial report on greenhouse gas emissions for Minnesota for all sectors, and that will be ready early in 2023. I think it'll be interesting to look at how the transportation sector was impacted early in the COVID years. And this inventory really just takes us through 2020, so that the first year of COVID. It takes that much time to gather all the information and data and for that to become available. But it will be interesting to see what happened with transportation and also the energy sector, which is really starting to turn the corner. So there's some good news that we'll see with what's happened with our energy production in Minnesota and in surrounding states. So I think it'll be interesting. It'll be something that we would invite the TAB to hear. If you want to have us come and present on that in 2023, we'd be happy to do that.
I think we would want to do that. Thank you, Member Buin.
Just those two items.
Sure. Any questions for Member Buin? All right, thank you. And then I'm going to bring up John Solberg, the TAC chair. I don't know if he has a TAC report, but we're going to roll into a lot of work involving John, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to keep it brief again today, certainly TAC in the last month has heard all the information that you're going to hear today, hopefully distilled it down so it's a little easier for you to make a decision. Our meeting was 3+ hours or thereabouts, so I'm not wishing that on you today. But one additional item is that we did start or initiate the process for electing a new chair for TAC, and so that will be voted on next month, and then you will have a new TAC chair reporting to TAB starting in January. Otherwise, I will wait to go through our recommendations with the other items and with the consent agenda, Mr. Chair.
All right, good, thank you. Why don't you just stand by, John, and I think what I'll do is go now to the consent portion of the agenda. We've got minutes in that portion of the agenda, and then we've got the Maple Grove program year extension request. I think you could just give a quick summary on that, and then we'll see if we can get a motion on the consent agenda.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So that consent agenda item is Maple Grove Rush Creek Boulevard project, which was original solicitation in 2018. Really, the project is asking for a continuation or an extension of their project year, program year, in part because the project does include an interchange access modification report that is coordinated with the Federal Highway Administration. That's taking longer than was expected. It was not originally anticipated. And so what that's done is back up Maple Grove's project development timeline. And so they're asking to be able to go from 23 to 24. And with that, they understand the policy of that funding also pushes back. It doesn't necessarily follow the program year itself. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Here's Heffinson.
I really have nothing to add unless people have questions about it. We think we've made a lot of progress and expect that this will move forward in a timely fashion.
All right, good. Do we have a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion, Member Anderson, second, Commissioner Gattel, that we approve the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now we're going to move on to the non-consent portion of the agenda, and we have structured this portion of the agenda in a way where we can take on the meatiest of the issues first, and this is an extension or a continuation of the conversation we had last month about distilling down the options to help staff and the TAC with their analysis. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to have John Solberg, our chair of our TAC, kind of background us, and then Steve is also going to assist in that, Peterson's going to assist in that backgrounding. So John will provide the TAC report, the backgrounding by Steve, and then we'll move on to the key issues that we need to address. So Chair Solberg?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what we ended up is we did a little flipperoo on you here, and we'll give some background on the solicitation, then I'll give the TAC recommendation for the committee so you all understand, get that background in the solicitation itself, and then the TAC recommendation for you to consider.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So just as we came back to this from last meeting, we thought the first really step here would be to give you some background information on how we developed the scenarios that are remaining. So again, about a year ago's time, you approved an application and it included these application types formed under the mode. So under roadways, you have 5 application types. Under transit and TDM, in green, you've got 4, and then under bicycle and pedestrian, there's 3 application types. So that's the basic format we wanted to ground everyone in. Again, we have 2 funding options that TAC is forwarding on to you, and some background on where those came from. And you've seen these now, or iterations of them for the last few months, but several questions came in. Well, how did you come up with these? Where do they come from? So the first one is the midpoint scenario that's shown in blue in your packets, blue color, same blue as you saw last month. The midpoint looks at essentially the historic modal funding allocation between roadways, transit, and bike ped, and that's shown on the screen, 55.5% for roadways, 30% of the money to transit, and 14.5% for bike ped. So that's the midpoint of what's shown at the top of the screen here. This is the modal funding ranges that you approved last December. So it's there's a range for each of those modes, and the midpoint is obviously the center point of those ranges that you approved. So that's how we came up with midpoint, and that's shown in blue. The second scenario that TAC is forwarding you today for consideration is the bicycle pedestrian heavy, shown in pink. Similar to what you saw last month, with a few changes based on your direction that you gave on a few items in that straw polling from last month. So the reason we developed this one is because we had a high number of applications that were submitted in those bicycle and pedestrian areas. Also, we did that public survey, online survey, and the public suggested we should put more money into bicycle pedestrian. So we looked back to that modal funding range, again, for bicycle pedestrian. That's shown right here, 9 to 20%. So we said, instead of hitting that midpoint for bicycle pedestrian, let's go all the way to the top of that funding range, 20%, and put 20% of the total money towards bike ped. And that would be a good counter to the midpoint scenario. So when we did that based on the TAC recommendation, John will kind of get to that. We started at that 20%, but in fact, we did go slightly over that 20% maximum, and TAB does have that discretion to do that. In the application, it says we give applicants a general sense for how much money is going to be going into these funding categories, but TAB reserves the right to go above or below them. So instead of the 20%, we ended up about 21.5%. And not that that's good or bad, but that's a policy question that you have to decide today whether if that B1 makes sense from that standpoint. So you can see the differences between them here, and from a financial standpoint, kind of the difference between midpoint and bike ped is a reduction for roadways and B1 of 11 million and 5 million respectively, and with some rounding, that gets you to about $18 million more going to bike ped. So you get more bike ped projects, but it comes from a combination of roadway and transit projects is the key point there. Last thing, and then I'll turn it over to John here, the TAC chair. We did put together a one-pager, and this is shown in your packet, about the third page. And the thing we were trying to do here was to go through what are some key technical differences. So we brought this through the funding programming committee and TAC actually twice to try and tease out in a one-pager what are the key differences between the two. The top 2/3 of the page is kind of the financials. These modal funding ranges here show just the federal STP and CMAQ money. So this is what we're talking about, the $307 million is the total. What made this scenario, or this cycle, a little bit more complicated is we have the two new funding sources. One is the carbon reduction, and one is the bridges. So we did not include either of those two sources into the numbers you see on the page here for the modal funding, because you approved an application that was before IIJA was approved, and we knew these new funding programs. So the $300 million is just the traditional STP dollars you're used to, and the CMAQ dollars. The two new funding sources we treated as a separate entity. At the bottom, last thing maybe at the bottom of this table 1 to point out are the key outcomes expected, and Chair Hovland spoke to this a little bit on his introduction, but we also wanted to say, okay, what do you get for some of the key policy areas we've been talking about at TAB, that being equity bonus projects that scored high in safety, the monetized safety benefit, intersections impacted from an ADA perspective. That was one topic from last month. Counties with projects, different cities and townships that were funded. And I think in either case, we're hitting a lot of those regional objectives, so that's good, policy objectives. And what we heard from the TAC is there really isn't a big difference between the two scenarios. If you look at the top line here, we've got either 86 or 88 projects. And the only difference between the two is about 10 projects. So, you got 5 projects here, 5 projects there, but the bulk of the projects, 70 out of, or 80 out of 88 or thereabouts is the same. So you're getting the top scoring projects in either scenario. And that's probably why TAC said there's not a whole lot of difference between the options. If we were to tease out what those were from on a project level, in the midpoint scenario, so the first one, blue, you're funding a different mix of roadway projects. So thanks, John. You're either getting the 2 strategic capacity, the 2 big roadway projects, or 2 medium or smaller size roadway projects. And you're also getting 1 more transit project in the midpoint, so that's the blue one. In the pink one, again, we're shifting money to bike ped there. The key difference is you're getting about 4 more multi-use trail and bicycle facility projects. So a different mix of roadway projects in the transit in midpoint, in the bike ped, you're getting 4 more trail projects. So the kind of project level, that's the key difference. And I think with that, John, you can move on to your slides.
So,
Thank you, Steve.
Mr. Chair, I think one thing just to go through first is that TAC did spend an enormous amount of time trying to get to something, to get to TAB to be able to make hopefully maybe a little more efficient discussion. And so part of what we were looking at was, well, what are the differences between these 3 options that we had at the time? And ultimately, what we ended up doing is making a couple recommendations, and that first one was about over-programming, which you've already brought up to TAB here. And with the ability to over-program, which TAC supported, then we recommended that what was B2 at the time be taken off the board, because with over-programming, you could make B1 look exactly like B2. So that was the idea. So now you have less, if you will, milquetoast, if you will, to decide between, because they are very similar, as Steve mentioned, 86 to 88 projects. 7 counties get funding to 7 counties, 53 to 54 projects in cities and counties. So it's meeting, right, a lot of that dispersion of funds across the region. You're getting to the highest safety needs. You're getting to those ADA federal requirements that are required across the city that we know just generally cities, counties, state are not maybe at the level that they should be. So we were trying to come up with differentiators for you. Overall, so that's how we ended up getting rid of that B2, and many of you probably don't even remember what B2 was now, other than to see it in there. And to tell you the truth, I don't really remember it either, other than it was one project basically different from B1, so a good reason to get rid of it. That second piece there that is in the recommendation was to go from 11% to 12% over programming. And I want to give a little history on that. So TAB has typically been in the 10% over programming, sometimes 11% over programming. And that was felt as a way that you can mitigate projects that drop out of the program. So these projects that are over programmed can move forward, they have funding, and they can move forward in time. Well, keep in mind that we have that additional funding that's in the solicitation this year, which, as you see with the 86 or 88 programs, is additional projects as well. So that does come with an additional increase that projects may slide back. So we felt it appropriate to jump that over-programming level to 12%, and I'll explain why in a little bit, but 12% in order to allow an additional project or 2 to slip into the program that could use that money if and when a program project were to slide back or get a program year extension like we just had today. We went to 12% because, again, historically we've been at 10%, occasionally 11%. 1% of that additional funding is basically $3 million. Okay, so $3 million is not, it's overcomable, but we didn't want to go to 13 because, well, TAB has historically gone by what they've done in the past, by historical precedent. And so we didn't want to start the precedent that we're jumping 2%. So that's why we held at the 12%, felt it was certainly something that we could manage within the funds that are available. And so again, 12%, not 13. As far as the options and what we ended up doing with some of that money, and that's represented in your packets by the yellow, and I don't think we have a slide on that right offhand. But when we did that over-programming shows up as a yellow box in your project list. And that's intentional, right? If you agree with over-programming, then you agree that it should go to that project. And that was, again, in part, why we were saying it went to a specific project, because that shifted and made B2 very similar, that sort of thing. And so in the option A, there was not really and we did this through a polling to try and decide, well, what is the direction you want the over-programming to go, right? And in option A, there was just a slight leaning towards roadway to get that, and so that ended up was applied to the Waconia roadway project and a St. Paul traffic management project. In option B1, the leaning was to go towards more bike ped. It was the bike ped heavy scenario. So that goes to that Scott County Merriam Junction Trail project and a Dakota County reconstruction project. So when we totaled all the money and you move it around, that's kind of what we ended up with our options A and B, to give you a clear leaning of there's a roadway, more roadways and some more bike projects to choose from. This does not take into account, and I want to be clear about this right now, it isn't including the carbon. That's a separate motion, right? So that's additional bike ped type projects that were not included in this recommendation, because we felt it was more appropriate to really settle on what is the regional funds for the scenario 1 or B, A, and B. Get that decided first, then we can talk about the next selection, and that's really how you're set up to make your decisions today, is the regional solicitation, and then we'll go on to 46, which will be carbon, and then 47 finally is HSIP. And so, again, a lot of discussion we tried to keep out of, and Chair, you've already mentioned it, we tried to keep it at a regional level. What's the benefit for the region? And I think, do we get to the questions? Key questions for you ultimately are the 11 to 12% in overprogramming. Is it, which base option do you like, which is the midpoint or the bike ped heavy? And then there may be tweaks to how you allocate projects, but we wanted to get to those major pieces first. And with that, Mr. Chair, ultimately, the motion that we'd be looking for from TAB is to recommend a program of projects to receive the funding through the 22 regional solicitation, and that be included in the 24 to 27 TIP and amended into the 23 to 26 TIP and forwarded to the Metropolitan Council for concurrence. And so I certainly am available to answer any questions folks have about why TAC made the recommendations that we did for your consideration today.
Thank you. And so what you're saying is the language up on the screen with regard to the recommended motion, we're not selecting, we are recommending to the Met Council that they select, if you will.
Correct, Chair Hovland, yes. So you're making that recommendation as a joint body and for the council to make that decision.
Right. So when it comes time to make that kind of a motion, folks, keep that in mind. I think the first thing, well, let's ask if members have questions, because I think the first thing we want to address and probably have a motion on as a preceding the motion that's recommended here, it'd be the over-programming issue. But I think Commissioner or Member Malushnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that it would be appropriate for us to approve the recommendation of 12% of over-programming.
A second.
All right, that's good. We'll get a discussion on that right away. So we got a motion by Member Malushnik, second by Commissioner Cattell, that we accept the tax recommendation to increase over-programming and recommend over-programming from 11% up to 12% to the Met Council. So let's have some discussion on that.
Anderson.
Mayor Winchell.
So a question, and I understand the over-programming, and I'm good with that. What happens if A or B1, and they each have projects, what happens to that project in the one that isn't selected? Does it come over And do we put it toward another project? I know we didn't talk about it in exec committee, but I just thought of that. What happens? We're gonna pick something. What happens to the one that's not in the other?
So I think, Mr. Chair, for Mayor Winchell, the yellow box is in both scenarios. So that, if you pick scenario midpoint, that's the one you're selecting effectively for the overprogramming. If you select B1, that's the one that overprogramming would be credited towards. I mean, in grand scheme of managing a pot of $300 million, it's behind the scenes, but so you understand where that's coming from.
Okay, so that's a question probably posited in the next portion of the discussion, but let's concentrate now on this potential overprogramming and take tax recommendation to go to 12%, which creates an extra $3 million in possible usage by the tab. And somebody had,
Mr. Anderson.
Member Anderson.
You know, thinking through this, you know, we've always been in a, or since I've been here anyway, we've been in a kind of a stable environment where interest costs are about the same, construction costs vary a little bit, they go up, they go down. I'm wondering if we overprogram, if we need to think about the new environment we're in. You know, we've all, from the municipal side, have been through situations where we have a good project and you get to the bid letting and it's way out of whack, or the bond sale goes bad and your interest costs are high. And I don't want to put us in a situation where if we've overprogrammed too much, we have to throw out a higher scoring project to take a lower one because of a funding issue. And I don't know if that's even a factor, but it's something that comes to mind.
We did have a discussion about that very issue at the exec committee, and I'll let Member Geisler comment on what I think is a common observation from the exec committee on the very issue that you raised.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the discussion we had really resolves around moving from 11 to 12 is a $3 million move, as Chair Solberg mentioned. It really comes down to, we know we have more projects being presented here. So the likelihood of more projects falling off is greater than what we have done previously. We also look at the fact that we've got $300 million versus $200 million with solicitations. So the likelihood of the dollars falling off, setting aside project parts, if one strategic capacity project falls off, that's $10 million rolling back in. We know that there is a likelihood of that given the current state of affairs of the money right now. We know that the next solicitation is going to be a little larger than normal based on all the things that are currently approved that we're planning on. We also know that, you know, given economic disparity, or what's going to happen recession-wise, there could be a potential for funding, local funding, to be harder to obtain, as Member Anderson's discussed, which means that if projects fall off, the whole point of programming is to make sure that these federal dollars stay in the region and don't get turned back. And so if magically nothing bad happens, no projects get an extension, everybody hits their targets, we have the ability to make up for that in the next solicitation, where we just spend a little bit next on the next solicitation because we made commitments this solicitation. And I also think to the scoring conversation, it's important to remember that scores solicitation to solicitation have no bearing on each other at all because they're relative scoring. They're scored on a curve. And so the top scoring in a given year in a given category isn't going to mean the same. And we also adjust the scoring percentages a little bit of which gets more weight, you know, does safety get more, does equity get more? We've adjusted those solicitation to solicitation as well. So it's important to not carry through the scores too literally between each solicitation. I'm in favor of moving to 12. I think it's a reasonable step given all the potential risks we have to ensure that these federal dollars stay in the region.
Member Anderson, any further on?
I agree with most of that. I was thinking of it in terms of just this solicitation, not moving things to the next. And I know we've had a situation in the past where we've had some overprogramming dollars later in the year, like the 169 Champlin project that we approved at one point. You know, that was kind of a comeback and address it later things. So I don't know that there's a huge danger of us turning funds back. I think there's always another project. And I guess my concern was we don't want to be short-sighted in thinking about potential cost increase in this cycle.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to second what, a portion of what Member Geisler said, that the uncertainty of the environment and uncertainty of costs and all those dynamics actually is an argument to over-program, because that means in the uncertainty that potentially more projects are going to fall out, and that's the reason to over-program.
Right. That was the conclusion we came to at exec. Member Jalali? Did you have your hand up?
No.
Yes. Nice to have you here, Commissioner.
It's great to be here.
Live is a pleasure.
I'm not going anywhere. Well, Mr. Chairman, in the slide, I mean, so thank you, I guess, for the Waconia project. I'm not sure who thought to maybe put that one up, but don't those yellow projects add up to more? Don't they add up to about 7 million? Where's the extra money?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's a good question, and the answer is, it's a combination of this extra over-programming. We had a little bit, if you look back at old tables, we had this row called yet to program, and that was money that either we were transferring, wasn't enough for a full project, so we kind of added all that up, sharpened our pencils as we kind of got down to the last meeting here, and the combination of all those three factors added up to get us, it's more than $3 million of projects if you add them up, but that's where the additional money is coming from. Over-programming, yet to program, and kind of zeroing in on the exact dollar amounts in the end here.
The couch cushions.
Yep.
That's basically what it
Well,
is.
Mr. Chairman, I think at the outset of your comments, it was about regional priorities. And there isn't anybody in Carver County that thinks that Waconia project is a regional priority of any kind compared to the Minnewaska project that drops off when we go to B1.
Would you pull that microphone a little bit? Commissioner Workman, will you pull that microphone a little bit closer to yourself, please, so people can hear?
Boy, my mom would disagree that I'm not loud. The million people that go into the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum right there every year, that's a regional priority. So we're a little miffed at where that Waconia project came from. I'm not sure anybody had a discussion about, what maybe was a priority for Carver County, but that's maybe the energy that I have here today with what we're trying to get accomplished regionally. Doesn't seem to match up on this, Mr. Chairman.
Keep in mind, Commissioner, and the rest of us as well, that we've got number 3 ahead of us here. So the key question right now is we want to resolve is, are people comfortable with that over-programming to 12%? And that's the issue I think we need we need to make that threshold decision, because that's going to drive a lot of what else we do here today with either A or scenario B1, and then any tweaking to those scenarios as is suggested by, I think, inherently suggested by Commissioner Workman. Other comments on the motion? Okay. Well, let's vote on this then. So the motion is whether to support the tax recommendation to increase the over-programming amount for the regional solicitation, recommend that increase on over-programming from 11 to 12% to the Metropolitan Council. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, now let's talk a little bit about these base funding scenarios that the TAC has distilled down from 3 to 2.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
I'm curious, it almost seems, a prior question is, why are we only spending half the carbon money? And that's the green, and what we do with the green certainly does affect these base funding scenarios. So can we hear something about
Sure,
the
we can
carbon
hear
money?
about that. Yeah, we talked about that in exec as well. We can hear about that. Gentlemen?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a great question. So we have money from 2023 to 2027 for this new federal program, carbon reduction. We brought the tab last month and then brought to our full council and asked them how many years to use. And at this point, what's showing is 2 years, 2023 and 2024, that amounts to $16 million. Because it is a new federal program, we have to treat it slightly different than the rest of it. So in this case, for carbon reduction, it's actually gonna be a recommendation of the full council, and not to get into too many of the details here, but there's an MOU between the council and MnDOT. And in that MOU, it dictates this STP and CMAQ dollars are decided by TAB, that's why it says select projects in the motion here. How to use this carbon reduction money is not dictated, kind of the process for how to go about selecting that between the council, TAB, or a combination of the two. And so because it's not written in that MOU, we asked the council as what they'd like to do, and that's how we got to the 2 years of funding. And the reason for that recommendation was because MnDOT, as required by the US DOT, has to come up with a carbon reduction strategy by November of 2023, so a year from now. They've asked us, and we think it's prudent, to hold back on those remaining 3 years, being 25, 26, 27, until the state carbon reduction strategy is completed to make sure we're in alignment with it. And it might mean going back to this project list, or it might mean a different process that either TAB or the council put forth. But at this time, because it's a new program, we asked the council, and the direction we got from our transportation committee was just to use 2 years at this time. Come back in 2023, in a few months, and really look into it in a greater level of detail, whether it's funding more projects here, like I said, or a different process. So, Charles, did I hit that right? Yeah.
And maybe one additional point too is we know right now, the bike ped, why TAC recommended it in part as well, bike ped is we know those are covered by the carbon program. There's some other options that are available that aren't that we don't know the extent of which. And so by holding those monies, we can get more clarity on what is eligible. And that might be in other areas that TAB and the council find are bigger priorities.
Commissioner, was that helpful?
Yeah, it is, I understand the reasoning there.
Okay, good, thank you. Other question? Yeah, Commissioner.
Just to kind of piggyback on this, if I might, you know, we've been told no carbon money for roadways at this time. Is there any hope of roadways qualifying for any carbon money of any sort, similar to some of the CMAQ standards, or is this just never gonna help roads ever?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Holberg, I think one of the things that's exactly what we're trying to figure out is what are the levels of carbon, right? A lot of these program dollars have come out with not a lot of guidance from the Federal Highway Administration, so part of the carbon strategy that's required is the state setting pieces of that in place, so, and getting more guidance in the next year to help move that forward. Could it go towards roadways? Yes, potentially, but it's likely that it will be limited in scope, meaning it's probably not gonna fund additional lanes, for instance, but it may fund reconstruction that gives new sidewalks and multimodal, and so that's what we just don't know.
Congestion mitigation
But we
stuff.
do know bikes, trails, sidewalks, we know those are eligible.
So one thing that also might be helpful based on this carbon money discussion is to point out that this is not regional solicitation money, and hence the agenda being set up the way it is for a particular reason, so that we can deal with where we want to invest those carbon reduction dollars. Have that conversation in the context of this particular conversation, but we're going to be making that decision subsequently after we figure out our policy here, our policy direction. So, okay, back to you, gentlemen.
I don't think we have anything else, but we did want to clarify the motion as written here, because for the regional solicitation, TAB is selecting a program of projects, and the council concurs with that, so they can send it all back or none of it back, accept it. But with carbon reduction, that's, I think, what you were alluding to, Mr. Chair. That's where the TAB is making a recommendation to the full council, so.
Correct.
Not to get into, maybe an attorney like you probably appreciates that, but
We
the
get to
distinction there.
2022-46, we'll make that change in the
Right.
recommendation.
Yep, so in this case, TAB is selecting the projects, council's concurring with it.
Okay.
Otherwise, Mr. Chair, it's really for any additional discussion, because I think you've gone through number one. Number two is maybe more about discussion or emotion if somebody chooses, and if you, or if there's questions for us regarding why TAC had only wanted two options or whatever it may be at your pleasure.
All right, as we talked about this in the exec committee, A versus B1, and some of the concerns that were raised, I thought Mayor Winchell had a good point that he wanted to make with respect to some of the highway funding. I don't know if you want to make that comment here as well. It might be helpful to the discussion.
Certainly, thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess my comment was that in this, if we go to the B1 scenario, we'd only be giving out 32 million in strategic capacity, and previous years we've done nearly 70 million. And I think that changes a lot. And we all have a different area where we live and where we operate. Some areas need more pedestrian and transit projects. I'm in an area that we need more road expansion. And we have to look at our region as a whole of what it is. And we've set these modals for a reason, and we've used them for the last few solicitations. And I just think it's important that we still have to look at how it affects the region as a whole. And I still think that as we have more and more carbon money, that money can be used more for the trails and then hopefully free up more for roadways. But if we take it all and move more over to the pedestrian heavy mode, that takes 11 some million away from roadways. So I just think that that's something that we really need to consider thinking about moving forward, and what this does to a region as a whole. And you just gotta look at it as a whole, not just your own individual area.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that observation. That led to a comment by Commissioner Gattel, and I think that would be appropriate for you to opine on what you were thinking about. And actually, I think his comments fed right into what you were thinking about before we even got to that meeting.
Well, actually, before we got there, I'm always trying to find a path forward, right? And I really listened to some of the commissioners' comments in our last meeting about, and like Mayor Winchell, and Dakota County, and Anoka County, and that they're road heavy. They don't fare well either in the bike solicitation either, because they just don't have the numbers and everything. And that's something I think we brought up in the executive meeting, and we'll address probably in the next solicitation to try to do something about that. But on this whole vein and everything, I'm going to tell you that Hennepin County really likes the B1 because we are bike and ped and heavy, you know, that works for us as far as for that. But again, trying to find a path forward. I was looking into this, we were looking into this further with staff. And what we looked at between the two of them, one of the things that you'll do if you've got this big old piece of paper here with you is page 13, where we saw if you look at let's just do it by colors, the blue and the pink. The blue on the side has far less what I would call the bike ped, which is something that a lot of us who like the bike ped pink would like. And so my proposal might be, as we look at a lot of the Safe Routes to Schools dollars or over programming dollars, it could come in many different flavors, is to move into doing a couple more of these bike projects in the midpoint on page 13. But because if you look at Safe Routes to School, we have solicitation that's actually open right now, and there are other pots of dollars that are coming from MnDOT that can fund those Safe Route to School. So if we didn't do every single Safe Routes to School, we could move some of that programming into there. This would be a compromise that gave us more bike ped and got the roadways for our sister counties that are further out. And so that's a proposal that I put forward for conversation and for discussion.
And that led to some comments by Member Geisler, our analyst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so one point that we hadn't touched on that was brought up last meeting was the project ranked number 7 in the transit expansion was a very lower scoring project relative to the rest of the transit expansion projects. We had talked about what if, you know, switching back to the bike, multi-use trails and bike facilities, you know, project ranked 13 there, it's 4.9. The mobility hubs is 4.8. And then if we looked at the safe routes to school and kept the top two mini carbon reduction projects, it's about $2 million. That freed up about $4 million. That got us basically 2 more projects in the bike ped. So we would be funding with that swap, Project 13 and then the Ramsey County T14, which is tied, which we've had issues with tied projects discussing how to fund those before. But it was a way to keep some of the carbon reduction money in the safe routes to school, since that was clearly a priority also that we discussed at the table. But to make, again, to Commissioner Gattel's point, how do we make the midpoint closer to the bike ped, or how do we make A match B1 a little bit more in the areas that are key to the bike ped heavy counties, while also maintaining the road side, and then knowing that there's an offset for the safe routes to school with an additional program that TAB doesn't oversee.
And can I just add that on the carbon reduction, I just think that keeps in with the theme of what carbon reduction, if we know what carbon reduction really is, and I think we all have a understanding, even though it's not defined for us very well, but those bike ped trails are gonna cut more carbon than the safe routes to schools. They just are. And I believe that that is a possible case here when we look at that.
So the implication of the scenario that you kind of worked up with respect to folks that might be leaning towards A, how does that help with the issue that Mayor Winchell raised?
So to the point with, if you fund A, it maintains the strategic capacity funding, which is the large one that Mitchell brought up. Of instead of cutting it in half, we're funding about 50 million into the strategic capacity bucket, 52 million, which is much closer to what we've historically done in that category. Again, the midpoint is effectively the historical version of what we've always done. That's the intent. It really preserves that, we need to fund roads, again, from the Bethel to Belle Plaine area that we're talking about, right? And everything in between, just to coin, I keep saying that, but it's a way to make sure that we need roads in places, we need trails in places, we need transit in places, some places need all three. So it really does address keeping funding into strategic capacity and those other items.
Good, thank you. Back to Mayor Winchell.
I would just like to maybe have that comment from Commissioner Gertel, just that about safe routes to school aren't really carbon reduction.
I just said they don't do as much
As
carbon
much.
reduction.
No, and that's what
I believe they are carbon reduction, yes.
And the only reason I just wanted to come back on that is I know that we have some schools that are next to a state highway, so there's no bike traffic, pedestrian, for kids. And so what do you see there? You see over a mile of cars lined up there, sitting there idling to drop off or pick up. So I would say that there would be in some places clearly
yes,
a large degree of carbon reduction in area. And we have one of them that's already been funded and putting in underpasses that would then again allow kids to ride bikes to school where they currently can't do that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Her point was well taken. But there are places and times that there is definitely a factor where it would make a big difference. And carbon reduction money there, I feel, could be used.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Commissioner.
I think this is our third meeting in regard to the solicitation.
Yes.
Is this correct? After the first one, we said the carbon money, we really want to see that go to more bike and ped projects because they are very high-scoring projects. Quite far down the list, they're still 80% of the points. And if the midpoint takes none of the carbon money for our bike and ped. So that's why I asked, how did we decide just to spend 2 years of the carbon? Because we're really not using it as we said. We would like to see it in one of the scenarios here, and that doesn't seem to be correct. And then I wondered, in the midpoint, how does the lowest scoring transit project that I think is related to Southwest Light Rail, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Golden Triangle Mobility Hubs scored They got 28% of the points within their category. So I'm not comparing category, I'm just comparing what happened in that category. Well, that's a project that, I mean, when is the Southwest Light Rail slated to be completed? And it's like, why does that get funded in the midpoint? So when there's been suggested to move that somewhere else, I would agree wholeheartedly that that's a future project that, I mean, that seems ripe to fall off the list. In terms of, is it related to Southwest? I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It would be Southwest Transit.
Southwest Transit, I believe, is the connection.
Yeah, it's a trend.
So it's a Southwest Transit
Not
project,
Southwest.
but the mobility hub, isn't that related? Or no, it's not related at all to the Southwest Light Rail? Okay, I'm corrected, sorry. But anyhow, again, the point is, in bike ped lot that we aren't funding got 80% of the points in their category, where a lot of those we're not funding. And then in this one, we're 28% of the points.
That
Doesn't
goes
seem-
to a point that I think Commissioner Holberg raised several months ago, and that
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
should there be a minimum threshold required for, even if you use the midpoint, you still want to be funding projects that score below a certain threshold, you know, and funding them, just because that the midpoint made them eligible. And that's something we can work on in the next solicitation. But a potential solution here is the very one we looked at in the exec committee, and that was a conversation started by Mayor Stephenson, who raised the same issue, and it led to that conversation about moving that money around and eliminating that project because of its low scoring, and then some reallocation, so. Mayor?
Yeah, so I think that, just to follow up on that, what I think we discussed in the executive session was that if you do the midpoint, the A midpoint, you remove the Southwest Transit number 7 on the transit expansion and rotate that money into the multi-use trails and bicycle facilities, the one, number 13, that it wouldn't be funded under the blue scenario. Essentially, the dollars are identical, and just simply rotate that bikeway project into the blue category. Essentially, the dollars work out fine. We expand the bicycle pedestrian construction, and we eliminate the one project that's scored so lowly. I think that would sort of accommodate a lot of concerns that everybody has about that project, and also end up keeping the project within the county where the money was allocated originally, and also promote more bike and trail facilities.
All right, good, thanks, Mayor, for that. Commissioner Montes Castillo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd actually like to just make the motion to accept the tax recommendation in B1. I'm hearing enough conversation that we're leaning in that direction, and I'd like to make that motion.
All right, that's a good way to start. You know, we talked about that on the screen, and what the recommended next steps were, and let's go to the base funding option we like, and then if we want to tweak it, we can tweak it, and we can decide if people like B1 or they like A. And we'll find that out based on your motion, assuming you get a second.
Second.
All right. We got a motion and second that we take the tax recommendation to adopt scenario B1, which is the bike ped heavy with the extra money going to roadways. Now we're in discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Just, we should clarify probably what is B1.
That's not, just saying one of the two tax.
Yeah,
So-
well, go ahead.
Funding option B1 as the motion provided is the bike ped heavy shown in pink.
Yep.
So that's
Right.
that's the motion on the table.
That is.
Just so everybody, right?
And we've already, yeah.
For Geisler.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify, TAC recommended A or B1. They did not recommend B1. They recommended one of the two
Right.
chosen.
Well, my motion is B1.
Correct, understood, but I just want to clarify that TAC didn't say B1.
Okay.
TAC said A or B1.
I think we knew what she meant. She liked tax recommendation on B1,
She's given us more credit than we deserve.
recognizing that they recommended two things. All right, and so we've got a motion and a second, now we're in discussion. And
Chairman, would it
Commissioner
be
Workman,
okay to ask for a roll call vote?
oh, we can vote, yeah, we can have a hand. We don't need, I don't know if we need a roll call, but
No, I-
we
I
can do it.
prefer a roll call vote.
Commissioner Schulte?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, thank you.
Yeah, it's my understanding that if B1 is selected, that regional balance, which is a stated and agreed and desired upon outcome, kind of goes away. All 5 metro ring counties drop substantially below the percentage of funding in relation to population and jobs, as compared to the 2 central counties where their percentages skyrocket, as evidenced in the third spreadsheet on page 15, titled Regional Solicitation Funding by Counties, Bike Ped Heavy Scenario plus Extra to Roadways. If you get to page 15, you'll see that in that third spreadsheet, the pink one. Down one more, right there, you'll see that. You go to the far right, you can see where the percentages drop sizably. And I think that option B1 also has a conflict with the approved modal funding ranges. Exceeds the maximum recommended range of 20% by more than 1.5%. If we have these standards and we set them out ahead of time, and it's a broad range. I mean, it was a big range of where it can land, and now it landed, well, 1.5% above the recommended range. Where in option 1, or A, the midpoint, to score high enough for funding, every project requires nearly 20% of the overall project cost to be allocated to bike and ped. Because that's what it takes to do one of those projects, to get them to score high enough in regional solicitation. You have to have that bike ped part of the project in there, and that essentially comes to about $34 million out of option A is bike ped, but it's not called out as that. It's called out as just transportation projects. So bike ped is heavily funded in option A. And I think option A speaks well for what this board should do, and that's fund transportation, transit, bike ped across the board. I think it's well balanced, and Anoka County will be supporting option A and not the current motion on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Holberg.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just a reflection of how, this is just a very convoluted process, because for some reason, in the second option, the pink option, Dakota County ends up with more money in another road project. And I think Scott County doesn't get, the only way they get their trail is in that one too. So I think it may be that a couple of the collar counties go down and some go up in the pink option. And I mean, the whole process seems very convoluted to me, and I think that the county should be able to, in the next round, maybe we can consider that they identify 1 or 2 priority projects, as being the most important, or a way to prioritize what's important to them. But I mean, I find myself astounded that Dakota County does better for roads under the bike ped heavy scenario, and it's because of that they're taking it out of the hide of strategic capacity. But unfortunately, I mean, I'm at a bad spot if I'm representing my county versus, I don't like the process. I think there's a lot to be desired in how we got to this point, but sitting here where I'm sitting, I don't have a choice. I'm gonna have to support the motion.
Member Koski.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I was just wondering if perhaps TAC could summarize the changes in county allocations under B1 and what counties would see increases?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Details.
And members, so you're looking at B1, so I'm guessing right here, kind of where I'm zeroing in on. So typically what we've done is we've compared the allocation.
You want to tell us what page that is?
It's page 15.
15.
Yeah, it's 15, I think, on your document, 16 on ours.
So I think what, what we often do is, well, first of all, we tend to look at this stuff over time. We try to at least, and that's why we've given you different timeframes to look at. But if the question is just in this solicitation for B1, we'd look at the percentages relative to either population or jobs. Those are some of the two key metrics that we look at. And so if I were just to kind of compare those going down the list, and that's your question?
Yes, I just was,
Go ahead, Member Koski.
Sorry, Chair. Just to make sure that, I'm hearing the conversation that that didn't feel that there was more of an, I don't know, if advantage or disadvantage, how everybody wants to see it, but that certain counties, it wasn't, the allocation was different. I think that this will kind of help show that there are here and shifts that are improvements for many counties.
Yeah, I'm guessing Commissioner Schulte put this together or looked at on a summation of the county by county, but just going on the list, between the midpoint and B1, Anoka County drops, Carver County drops, Dakota County goes up, Hennepin County goes up in B1, Ramsey County goes up in B1, Scott goes up, I think because of the trail project, and then Washington County does the same in each of them. So I'm guessing what the commissioner was probably added up 5 of the counties, and that's how he came up with his summary, right?
Correct. Any further on? Okay. Commissioner?
I hesitate to raise this point. I don't know how we've dealt with this in the past. Scott County, we would believe that we only have a project in B1. In Midpoint, there's a city project that's in the geographic area of Scott County, but it's not a Scott County project. So, I don't know how we've treated that in the past. If we counted every, like Waconia, is that counted as a Carver County project in all the past solicitations? That we counted a city as a county project?
Yep.
Is that true?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and members, so we look at all projects within the county boundary.
Okay.
Because you've got transit projects and different providers, and so that's the way we've done it.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, yeah, again, we don't know where that project came out of. It wasn't a discussion with Carver County or Public Works or anybody really about giving us that project, throwing us a bone or something. That's the mystical part of this is, thanks. But, so, again, not a priority. We'd love Dakota to do well. We'll give them that money if they'd like. So that's the frustration, Mr. Chairman, is we feel like we're kind of being told what our priorities are here. And we're looking in from the outside. I'm a man with 5 bicycles, one which has studded tires, a big proponent, but half the money going to the strategic category, I don't know.
Yeah, Commissioner, I'm told that the city of Waconia applied.
Yeah, we know.
So that's why you weren't aware of it, apparently. Somebody else had their hand up first before Mary Liz.
Geisler.
Oh, Member Geisler, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sitting as a citizen rep who, I live in Anoka County, but I represent a good chunk of Ramsey as well. District D is large. It covers a lot of people. I'm here to advocate for the better system as a whole, which is all modes, not just one. We know we have monies coming for carbon reducing efforts, transit, like that. We're talking about not spending a good chunk of it right now. We also know we have growing communities outside of, in the 7-county area that need more expansion, need more service. Without getting into specific details, we've got various projects in lots of places that need care and support that are roads. bus, one of the projects that we're talking about in Coon Rapids is right next to a transit station that enables the transit station to better work. Because right now it only works halfway. So ironic, it's a road project that better serves the transit station right next to it. It also partners with the other projects we've done in the region, in the area. The reason why the midpoint has been such a good choice year over year over year, solicitation over solicitation, is because it does the most, in the most places, the best that it can. It serves the most communities. Yes, there are some times where a county only submits one project and doesn't get their one project that they submitted. Yes, there are times where things don't always perfectly balance out. I think that's a matter of choice of, are there projects ready to be solicited for? If a county isn't ready to support 10 projects, why would they support the 10 projects? Why would they send it in the first place? It costs money to apply. So regional balance is very important, but not for the sake of if you only take one shot. I think that's important to remember. And the midpoint is truly going to serve the most, knowing that we have so many more opportunities to fund bike ped projects in the region, to fund transit projects in the region, which I wholly support funding them as well. Transit's practically fully funded in this solicitation. Bike ped is getting a huge investment in it's the most money that we've been spending in those categories historically. So I can't support B1 to lean over other ways to totally handicap other places when we know that we have opportunities to make up those gaps later on.
Thank you. Commissioner Holberg, and then Member Malushnik.
I'll just be super brief, because, there's a trend line here too. And Tom, I feel your pain. I know you for a long time. I'm glad you're here today, by the way. But if you look at the chart that shows the historical funding with Carver with 3% of the population and 2.3% of the jobs, you're at a 5.3% of the money. Dakota County underperforms both population and jobs historically and under both the blue and the pink scenarios. I mean, I think sometimes it's not your year. I don't know if there's a baseball or football analogy for that or whatever,
Well,
but.
we've used that here, but we don't necessarily have to balance year to year, but we try to achieve that balance over
I mean, I
time.
think that's another element to look at, the
Yeah.
long-range trend, and historically, Carver County's done very, very well compared to its population.
Mr. Chairman.
And I still love you, Tom.
Commissioner, there's, Commissioner, there's.
I mean, there's an arm of the Transportation Advisory Board that handles sewer pipe in the Met Council. And we have that pipe. We're the fastest growing county in the state. And like the fastest growing counties in the state before us, they have some great big pains. And Waconia can fix the front of Highway 5 in front of them, but they can't get to it without the Minnewaska Bridge being widened, which is a disaster every night, starting about right now. And so we have the sewer capacity to expand, and we are. And so therein lies the problem. I think I asked Myron Orfield in a committee in the legislature this 102 years ago, which comes first, the development and then the roads, or the roads and then the development? He didn't really answer, but the population usually is out ahead of the transportation dollars, and so we're lagging. And it's a very frustrating situation. This little piece is why the landscape arboretum has to move their front door away from the Highway 541 intersection. And so it's a bad situation. I think Commissioner Schulte said it well. We're going, and this gentleman, we're going outside of our normal parameters to short the strategic part of this or building roads part of this? And so that's what I don't get.
Well, stay tuned, you're gonna hear some other views of the world. Member Malushnik, I gotta hold off here, there were other folks ahead of you, Member Jalali, and then Member Martinson, then Member Malushnik.
Thanks. I'm just speaking in support of B1.
We can't hear you very well.
Mike.
Either pull the mic over or maybe.
Sorry, normally I'm really loud and I don't need a mic. I'm speaking in support of B1. I think that actually the way that we have funded these projects historically is not necessarily the best precedent to adhere to. I think that it has led to underinvestment in improvements that make the transportation network safer. I think it has caused us to kind of get stuck in an unsustainable funding cycle of just pouring millions of dollars into maintaining the same road network without actually giving people routes to get out and like use different modes of transportation in addition to that. And I think that's important right now. And the way that we fund that, I just think that option B1 actually puts more investment in all of the categories at the rate that we needed to historically. It sets a better precedent going forward. It will help keep people safer. It will help reduce traffic fatalities for pedestrians and people in cars. And it will get the most money into the most communities. So that's my piece. I know others are waiting to speak, but I'm very strongly in support of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jalali, and now on to Member Martinson.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to also speak in support of B1, and I'm going to go further than Member Jalali did in saying that, so if there's any category of funding that's been beggared by these processes over the years, it's been bike and ped. It's not roadways. If we're going to, I'm very much looking forward to seeing the MPCA report on the greenhouse gases and the plans for the future, because one of the biggest things we need to do about reducing those is to reduce our VMT. We don't reduce VMT by continuing to put $52 million into each of our regional solicitations into roadway expansions, which is what that capacity is about. So if anything, I think a case can be made that we're sitting in this funding situation with unique dollars from the IJA. That's one-time money, is it not? I mean,
No,
we can't.
The IIJA funding, Mr. Chair.
IIJA, yes.
Yeah.
So that's one-time money. I mean, I think if we were sitting in other cities around the world right now, we would be looking at building out in a 2-year period an entire regional network of bikeways with that money. We would be putting far more of that money into it than what is planned with either of these scenarios. So that would be what I would like to see. I am the bike ped representative. So that's my role to say that, right? So it's also what I believe, but that's a separate issue. But I think that the case can be made that this round should be looked at with respect to that one new pot of money that we've got. And I think that TAC has done a great job in terms of saying, yes, let's fund more bike ped projects this round. So.
Thank you, Member Martinson. Now back to Member Malushnik and then Member Jepson.
Well, I would be supporting the midpoint. And I think one of the first things that, oh, by the way, today I took Highway 13 over here through Scott County and Ramsey County. There's a significant regional trail, not one bicycle. And you can get to jobs and other things on that trail, not one bicycle today. When you say that we're expanding, and I'd like to ask the TAC chair this, and I put him on a spot, we're talking about safety. Now, I would just go a step further here. I think that should be our number one, is the citizens' safety of this region. I believe that the midpoint, and I believe that the experts would back me up, is the safest solution at this current time. I certainly want more trails, and I understand why I would like to get more people off the road. Sometimes I don't think we think about the citizens who can't use those trails. In my own home, there's 2 people that, because of their disabilities, will never be on a trail. They absolutely deserve the opportunity to go to their medical appointments, to go to the grocery store on the best way that they can, and that would be on our roads. So I think I'm going to conclude my comments with that, but I remember I always hate to go back and tell old war stories, but my grandfather was a township supervisor, and he advocated for Highway 219 in Pennsylvania many years ago. And he said, he told me as a 5-year-old kid, it'll be great for our economy here. And he said, but you always got to remember safety first. So with that, I support the midpoint.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jepson?
Mrs. Jepson.
Sorry.
Not a problem. Madam Chair, thank you very much. I'm having a really hard time really understanding both points of view, and I will be supporting the midpoint because to a number of points that my colleagues here have said, first with Mr. Barnes, which goes to Mr. Maluchik's comments, he was just talking about people dying and people being injured. We just got a report yesterday about the serious injuries and deaths. You have to have safe roadways in order to have safe bike ped. And if you take money away from those roadways, you put people's lives in danger. And I'm not okay with that, and I really would hope you all are not okay with that. And if you vote for B1, I'm not saying you're fine with it, but you really need to look at that as a huge question to answer, in my opinion. We also know that there's guaranteed money for carbon reduction that can go for bike ped and transit. Mr. Solberg just confirmed that. We don't know if it's gonna go for roads, so knowing a guaranteed versus an unknown, why would then we take money knowingly away from roads when pots of money are sitting there for bike ped?
That's for me.
Finally, to Mayor Winchettle's point and Mr. Geisler's point and maybe some others, if you're gonna go away from the standard of the way this group has worked in the past and made decisions in the past, I think that's a policy decision. I think that's a process decision that we should probably have additional conversation about rather than just diverting from it willy-nilly in a process that is a little bit convoluted. I will agree with that. But if that's something that we want to change, I think we should all agree to change it with one conversation versus vote. And to answer Mr. Workman's question, what comes first? Population growth, 100%. It's impossible for me and my city of Blaine to say no to population growth before roads are done because my city would fail. It would fail. Because we can't wait for these road projects and how long it takes for them to be approved in order to contain our population. And I would arm wrestle you over the fastest growing county because I think Anoka County might have to be, no. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Member Dugan.
Yes, thank you. Like my counterpart, Commissioner Holberg, I represent Dakota County, and it's interesting in my county's own interest to go with B1, but I do have concerns that that the two strategic capacity projects that are under, I'm sorry, A for both, let me see, I think Coon Rapids and, are pretty darn important. And as well, I know Mr. Workman doesn't like the Waconia, extra project, Commissioner Workman, I'm sorry. But they're in two different categories from the Mishawaka Bridge. The main concern I have with B1, the one reason I would like to support B1 is because Scott County in geographical balance gets a project. And in talking with Chair Barber last night, she said Scott took the honest road of saying, we only need this one project, we've got several underway, we don't have the capacity to do more. And also, we are funding, with the exception of, with the exception of the Hennepin County Marshall Street Bikeway and the Ramsey County resubmittal, we are funding all, in the blue scenario, we're funding all of the bike ped projects. And there is a solicitation coming, as Vice Chair Gattell said, from the state for safe routes to school. And and we'll have additional carbon reduction funding coming up. So I think I'm gonna go with A, although I'd like to make a change so Scott County is included. And hope Commissioner Holberg won't hold this against me, because unfortunately, we lose that big project in Dakota. Go with B1.
Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you. Representing Washington County, I can support B1. What I found interesting in the categories is that although bike and ped increases with B1, transit expansion decreases. There's a lot of talk about that, one's getting worse. Also, you know, Washington County only has 3 projects, they're strongly rated. We're getting either B1 or A, we're getting 14.4 million out of 300 million, even though we're 8% of the population. B1, I noticed in the area of roadway reconstruction and expansion and modernization, we have a project 19, which is next in line. It could potentially give us our 4th project if things happen to the other 18. It's also rated 68%, very close to some of the other projects. B1, again, I think highlights, yes, bike and ped increases, that's always controversial, but the trade-off is people that don't like the expansion of bike and ped usually don't like the expansion of transit, so that I see that as a trade-off. Washington County is always underfunded. We realize that. We accept it, but we do have a chance to get a 4th project with B1. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Foster.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me in this? No.
That one didn't seem to work.
I feel very rock star. How
That
about
one
this?
doesn't. That one seems dead also.
I'm gonna turn it on.
Turn it on, turn it off.
You are a rock star.
Yeah. All right, can people hear me?
Yeah,
I think it might have been working. Well, that's what
Thank you. So I do understand regional balance, and I think this is also about how everyone in the region is able to connect to each other, not just inside each specific county or city. I think if we, as a seven county area, are going to grow together, we need to lead with B1. It meets the needs of everybody in all of those communities, not just as they are now, but what they will be in the future. And they lift up people who have been left out by our existing transit systems, our existing roadway systems. Those are the people who we should be focusing on here, and I think B1 best does that. Member Malichnik, I want to thank you for sharing what you did about how people with disabilities and illnesses are often left out in our transit systems, in our road systems. I have epilepsy and legally cannot drive, so I absolutely have struggled with, thanks. Absolutely have struggled with that, and I just want to acknowledge what you said. Again, I'm a transit rider, I'm here as a transit rep. I do think public transit is one of the best ways that we meet those needs, and we need to expand it into all of the counties. One other thing, and I guess this is a question or a suggestion for staff, a lot of people have talked about using carbon reduction money for roads, if that can be done. I know that we don't know that yet. There's some research into that. Road diets and dedicated transit lanes seem like 2 big opportunities there in terms of safer roads. Road diets and dedicated transit lanes are absolutely part of safer roads too. So, you know, thank you.
Thank you, Member Foster. Commissioner Matas Castillo, and then Member Holst.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just echo the comments around, you know, B1 prioritizes our most vulnerable users. And I've heard this argument a lot of, I drove by the bike lane and there wasn't a bike in it. Well, Well, the problem is our bike lanes and our transit ways aren't necessarily connected to the places that people on bikes need to go. So we need to stop using that argument. I will tell you, I have driven on roads where I was the only car on the road. Does that mean the road doesn't need to be there? I mean, it's a silly argument. We need to connect our trails. We need to connect our transit ways, and we've got gaps in the system. We need to make sure that they're usable for people to go to the doctor's appointment or come to the TAB meeting. And we also need to make sure that we're maintaining them. The roads that are currently exist are not going away. This funding does not take those roads away. This funding, in fact, increase our connectivity for the most vulnerable users. It helps us get to our carbon goals. It makes safety improvements for pedestrians, for cyclists, and safe routes to schools. This is a great opportunity for us to bump ahead with funding that is available to us today. Some really important projects to make greater connectivity so that as we move forward through the system, that we continue to build the best network of trails, sidewalks, and roads for our entire community. So I strongly support B1.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. And then we're going to go to Member Holst and then on to Member Geisler and Member Gattell, Commissioner Gattell and Member Schember.
Hello, my name is Rich Holst, and just as a reminder, I'm the alternate for Bill Lindeke for District G. I just wanted to touch base on, I understand that the more carbon money is coming and that, or that leaves the potential for more bike ped projects, but I don't think the intent of it or the intent of our group should be to use that to shift more money into projects that weren't, I don't know, I just feel like I'm hearing some comments that would sort of indicate like, well, this could get funded this way. And I think the intention of the additional carbon funding is to really focus on carbon reduction in our metro area. I guess I'd also comment too that although I understand the value of midpoint, doing things the same way that we have been doing them historically doesn't automatically mean that that's a good way to go. I think we do need some changes in our transit system, and I think, and our funding and how we balance that around our metro area. Again, I agree that growth is important, and for all cities, it's true that they need to grow, whether it's any city in the metro. That's true for cities that are locked in their size, such as St. Paul and Minneapolis, with, there's not much space. And a lot of times that growth is going to be through transit, because sacrificing space for parking cars, for example, makes it really difficult when you have to dedicate so much space to vehicles. So we need density within the city. Anyways, that's my spiel, but I'll be supporting B1 today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Holst. And I'm going to go to Steve Peterson before I go back to Member Geisler.
Sure. Yeah, perhaps a moment's lost a little bit, Mr. Chair, here, but, I did write down, we got a lot of good ideas here for the next cycle, so I think that's important to note. One of those I've heard 3 times is multiple applicants that submit multiple applications, should they list their priority project? Because when we allocate money, the methodology we use doesn't account for that. We don't ask that of applicants. The way we do it is we look at the number of projects submitted, how much money we have left available, and sometimes that does lead to kind of the last few projects in the case of Mr. Workman here. We don't look at what the top priority project is for County A or City B, but we do look at the number of projects submitted, how much money is available, and that's the methodologies in a fair way to go down these lists that best meet the regional priorities based on our scoring system that everyone's been agreed to. So I think it's just good to know the process of how we allocate these projects, and it's not a random nature. It's based on, again, the number of projects submitted in each application category. So
based on an objective scoring system established by technical people over time.
Yep,
and blessed by this body.
And if people, maybe the last point is, one of the last items on here is tweaks to the existing, to one of the options. So if we approve an option, if there's a last project on the list that people like or don't like, there's an opportunity to make a motion on that, so.
Right, okay. Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, can you go back to the previous slide?
No, back to it.
Thank you. The funding ranges, thank you. So I just want to provide a little more information too around this. If we consider everything, you'll notice there's a little asterisk there that says, hey, bridge money and carbon funds and TDM aren't in those percentages. If we factor all the money in, all the pieces together that we're deciding today, not counting HSIP because that's got its own separate rules. but just the carbon money, the bridge money, and the regional solicitation money. Under the midpoint, roads get 55.8%, transit gets 25.7%, and bike ped gets 18.5%. That's with that carbon money going into the bike ped category as they exist today. Again, no modifications based on what's in our packet. Under B1, roads get 52, transit gets 24, so actually transit goes down under B1. And then bike ped gets 23.6, which is well outside of the desired range when you factor in the carbon money, what we typically talk about. So that's just some data points when you consider all of the money that we're talking about today, of what the expectations we gave to the applicants and what we set forth to do at the beginning of the cycle, which was those ranges.
Thank you. Member Geisler, Commissioner Gattel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, I kind of began this as Chair Hovland came to me to talk about, paths forwards and everything. I just want to say, and I want to reiterate, our priority at the County of Hennepin is carbon reduction and climate change. And so that is one reason why I said the county supports B1. I'm trying to find a path forward to something else, but I'm not hearing it here right now. VMT is going to be really crucial for us to look at. We have to get there. And however we can get there, we need to get there with transit and with safe roads as well. I understand new roads that are being built are much safer, and we do put money into that. And I think that's a real piece for us to note. But also, too, safety with pedestrians and bikes is even more crucial, I think. Your outcomes being hit by a motor vehicle, if you're a pedestrian or a bike, are not as good as if you're in a car. They're just not. And so, with that, I just want to reiterate that. I know we need money in these kinds of safety things. My Ramsey County Commissioner, you also brought up the most disabled of our community, those who need this the most. I find this in the county many times. I find going to the county and asking them to put in a couple more pedestrian ramps because they can't even get to the bus that they need to because of these old places. And so, getting this infrastructure built so that it can be usable really matters. Just because it's built doesn't mean they do it. When we see some of these BRT projects, that's one of the reasons I brought that up twice now about fully funding, fully scoping all the things that are needed to make sure people can get through the corridor to those bus stops. And that means signaling, that means crossings, that means ADA compliance. And we need to get there. We just need to get there because that's better for everybody. It makes them usable for everybody. And we'll see more usability then, I believe.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Schember.
So I was going to speak out in front of in favor of A, because of where we started the conversation with Commissioner Gattel. And I thought that was an elegant solution to having both sides find their way forward and the discussion actually moved its path forward into either or.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake for this body here to get into either or, because the historic mode of operating here is how do we figure this out together. And I just think we've moved the discussion into either or, and I think that's really wrong. And I really appreciate your last comment, because we're blowing bike ped out 4 points above the highest ever because we're trying to make a point on bike ped when we know money is coming that could address that in the future. So I'm going to vote for A. I think the elegant solution was tabled right at the beginning. And I'd urge us all to get back to how do we figure this out versus an either or. And I think B2 or B1, I guess is where we're at. B1 is a hard and fast, we're done here, and there's no other way out. And I think that's a mistake.
All right, thanks, Member Schember. Member Chambliss, and then Member Lewis, and then back to Member Dugan and Member Jepson.
Yeah, Chair, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate hearing from the perspective of all the partners that are here. Carbon reduction is really important to me. It's very important to everyone. Everyone can benefit from that. everything needs to work together, just like Commissioner Gettle said. We need the transit, we need the roadways, we need everything that supports this regional system. And from my work on the council, I know that Met Council members are going to be taking your recommendation very seriously. I see both of these options as good options with lots of counties being funded, lots of different projects being funded. So these two scenarios represent, significant investments in our region. So I think we'll be in pretty good hands, whatever you decide.
Thank you, Member Chambliss. Member Lewis.
I think this thing works. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first wanted to echo Member Holst's comments around the core cities and the first-ring suburbs in which the opportunities for growth and the opportunities for expansion come through transit, come through bike ped. And so on behalf of District C, that's a priority for the communities that I represent here, and wanted to make note of that here. In terms of the funding, I think it's important to note the reason that we've proposed B1, or at least my understanding of B1, is that we're responding to the requests that have come in. That's not a concept that we dreamed up. It's that we have a significant influx of projects that are being requested in this space. So I understand that there's a value in the precedent piece, but we're not changing or contemplating changing the precedent absent a cause. The cause is that we are trying to respond to what all of our member communities have put forward here, and this is a means of seeking to serve those with the funds and that we have available here. And lastly, we fund a few more with B1 than we fund with A, and so. Obviously, different priorities for different communities, but that we spread it across more geographies, fund a few more projects in B1 is one amongst the many reasons that I'll be supporting B1. Thank you.
Thanks, Member Lewis. Back to Member Dugan, then back to Member Jepson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Member Chambliss for that reminder. And after I finish speaking, and I'll be very brief, I ask Commissioner Patel to repeat that, because I have gotten away from it, and I have remembered it, but I haven't remembered it as clearly now after the discussion as I would like you to restate it, if you don't mind, ma'am.
Oh, you mean the alternate that I had?
Your general proposal.
My general proposal was an alternate using midpoint A, and then moving some of the dollars, and Member Geisler reiterated, moving some of the safe routes to school dollars into bike and ped, and doing a couple more projects, a way we could move dollars around to make this palatable, to get the roadway projects in that we would like to see, but also to get the bike ped pieces in. Noting that when you redo all these roads, and I think it was eloquently said here, is that there was bike and ped in those projects, or else they wouldn't have moved forward to begin with. And so that was my alternate to begin with, to see if we could find a path forward to get a consensus rather than this being either B or A and dividing us. I was trying to find a way to bring us together to a compromise, but a motion was made, and unless the commissioner would like to explore this one.
I'd like to go with the vote on the motion on the table.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
All
Chair.
right, bear with me. It's Member Dugan, are you finished? Or you have a follow-on?
Well, I do support what Commissioner Patel said. The collegiality, not conciliatory, but the way in which you all get along over many, I think I'm going in my 9th year. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And it was started by Commissioner Callison forfeiting a $6 million project that I think went to Scott. I don't remember. It was 4 years ago, prior to your service, ma'am. And where I'm having a hard time is that under B, transit decreases actually, and that would enable the under blue to fund the Hennepin County Marshall Street Bikeway project. The gap would only be then $4 million versus the two in terms of bike ped. But just historically. And Mr. Holtz brought up some great points, but the midpoints have been updated, they're dynamic. It's every solicitation, we look at that. The carbon reduction money, and I was confused, and I thank Mr. Holtz for clarifying, I'm talking about only the carbon reduction money that's right now. And it seems that, as Commissioner Gattell said, if we do some modification, and again, I would support Scott County getting its program, and if we went blue, Mr. Workman or Commissioner Workman would have the safety project near the Arboretum as well. So we'd have the geographical balance, and with the exception of the Ramsey County Phase 1 Bruce Vento Regional Trail Extension, we would have every bike ped project funded under blue. But I.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, Member Jepson and then Commissioner Schulte.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I'm going to change the comments that I was going to make and respectfully ask that we do, hear the motion. Obviously, it's on the floor. Respectfully ask that everybody vote no on it and bring back Commissioner Gattell's option as a consensus to what we're looking at. Thank you.
Thanks, Member Jepson. Commissioner Schulte?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. I know you all miss Commissioner Look here and his ability to eloquently throw a firebomb now and then, so I'm not going to do that. That's not my style, but I do want to point out one thing that I think is important, actually, and it's in the key differences between funding options that TAC put forward. It's, if you want to look, it is on page 3 of your packet, gray and white mostly, but between the two options, A and B1, there's 26 million more local dollars invested if you select option A. That's local dollars that go into these projects. So that's a big investment. That's 26 million more dollars into the region. Additionally, there is one more application funded if we go with the midpoint as opposed to B1. There's 33 in the midpoint and only 32 in B1. It's only one more application that's funded, but it is one more. And 26 million, if you look at the local dollars leveraged, it's 744 is the total investment. As you can see there on the chart, 744 total investment if we go midpoint and 718 if we go with B1. So there's just more of a total overall investment. And I think that's good for the region. I'm sure Commissioner Look would have had a much more vibrant way of saying that. But thank you for allowing me.
Thank you, Commissioner. Folks, yeah, we've had Member Jalali, then Member Holland's Head. Let's think about voting on this thing. All right, Member Jalali.
Yeah, as we go to a vote, I want to reiterate that I really feel that B1 makes the biggest investment in our communities in all areas of safety. You can't say a package is safer without making sure that there's guaranteed safety for folks who are disproportionately more likely to die from being hit by a car, not being even seen by a car, not having a safe roadway to travel on that they can use. And we can't just keep doing what we've always been doing. It's not financially sustainable. We can't insist on that when the planet is burning. And we have to make investments in something different if we want to get out of something different. So I support B1. It's a more holistic investment. It is the safer option. I strongly believe that, and I'll let others comment, and then I know we're voting. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Holland's Head.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the comment a couple times ago, local investment, I would like to ask staff if they can tell us how much local investment is transit projects and how much local investment is roadway, especially strategic capacity. Can that be broken out?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. It can be broken out. Most of the transit projects, minus the ABRT projects, come in at 80%, 20%.
I'm talking local, city, and county versus federal.
Right, they come in at a 20% local match, many of the transit projects. So the difference that you're seeing on the page is mostly because of the strategic capacity projects, because we're funding them at $10 million, but the projects are 30 or 40 million.
Well, that's what I thought, and my point is that outlying communities that have different needs from inner city and core and near core communities, are in a position, apparently, to make those matches, whereas the communities that are more served by transit and bike paths and pedestrian now are in not as good a position to make that match. I think that's a fair statement. So it seems to me that B1, by providing more money in this case for the latter, is the more attractive proposal from an investment standpoint. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Hollinshead. Folks, we got a motion in front of us to select scenario B1 as the program of projects to receive funding through the 2022 regional solicitation and to be included in the 2024 through 2027 TIP and/or amended into the 2023 through 2026 TIP. The maker of the motion has said that she wants to see the result of that motion, and so I'm thinking it's time to vote.
Mr. Chairman, can I again ask for a roll call?
You can ask for a roll call if there is a second, and we'll decide
Second.
by a majority vote.
Second.
All right. We got a motion and second to conduct this by roll call. We need a majority of the folks in this room to approve that, to have a roll call vote. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right. All those in favor of a roll call vote, say aye. Let's try it that way first.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right. We will call the roll on the motion as stated.
Gotell?
Aye.
Anderson?
Nay.
Bailey?
Aye.
Barber? Chambliss?
Aye.
Barnes? Crimmins?
Nay.
Dugan?
I'm sorry, I stepped out to get a cup of coffee.
On B.
And I don't think we should have a roll call. I think that.
It's already in
That issue is decided.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, do you want to favor, you want aye or nay on B1?
Nay.
Foster?
Aye.
Geisler?
Nay.
Giuliani Stevens?
Nay.
Burkhart?
Aye.
Holberg?
Aye.
Hollinshead?
Aye.
Jalali?
Aye.
Jepson? No. Karwoski?
Aye.
Koski?
Aye.
Lewis?
Aye.
Holst?
Aye.
Schulte?
No.
Maluchnik?
No.
Martinson?
Aye.
Mattis Castillo?
Aye.
Bewan? Johnson? Glenn?
Aye.
Petrick? Schember?
No.
Stephenson?
No.
Ulrich?
Aye.
Drosty?
Nay.
Williams?
Aye.
Winshuttle?
No.
Workman?
Aye. I'm sorry, no.
Sure, just to be sure, what was your vote?
No.
Your I.
That is a no.
Well, you're, no, that is an N. Okay, hold on.
So it should be 17.
1, 2, 3,
18, 15.
17? 17 ayes.
17 ayes, a win.
17 ayes and what nays?
That's like half, right? So we have 34 members.
Yeah, so we didn't know
So
it would be.
1, 2,
We got 34 members, folks.
doesn't pass though.
Oh, this happened once before.
You count me.
It was 18, 15.
chair votes in a tie. Oh, my God. I didn't go good last time.
It was 18 ayes, 15 noes.
Reminder, John.
Wow.
17, 15.
17, 15 nays, 17 ayes. Motion carries. All right, let's go to question number 3. Are there any tweaks that are being suggested to funding option scenario B1?
Somebody got any ideas?
Anything? No. Okay, nothing? We've got a recommendation for the Metropolitan Council with respect to the regional solicitation for the 2024 through 2027 period of scenario B1. All right, now on to, next is the 2022-46, which is the carbon reduction decision that we have to make. And Steve Peterson has this matter as well. And the motion, the recommended motion here is that the TAB recommend a carbon reduction program funding option to the council.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll take this one again.
All
So
right.
TAC, as far as the carbon reduction program, you saw the recommendations based in the overall program that was in front of you. And so TAC, from that standpoint, was supportive of the use of those carbon funds in both what was option A and B as presented in front of you. Again, utilizing that 16 million on projects that we know it can be utilized on, and supporting the fact that in 2 years or a year, whatever TAB may decide for use of those funds in the future, after the carbon strategy is completed by the state. But those carbon reduction funds were already applied, as you saw in the green in the graphic that you had, the spreadsheet that you had in front of you and considered as part of the first motion.
Questions for Chair Solberg? We have a motion for the TAB to recommend a carbon reduction program funding option to the council that's consistent with what's being proposed here relative to B1.
Second.
Motion by Member Martinson, second by Commissioner Gattel, that we recommend a carbon reduction program funding option to the council that's consistent with scenario B1. Discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So since considering we're down B1 here, I have significant concerns that we're only funding a tied project in the multi-use trails and bike facilities. Historically, when we've discussed this, tied projects either split the money or we try to make sure both get funded. So project T16, Scott County and Hennepin County are tied for score. So I guess the Hennepin County request is for $5.5 million. There's not quite that left in the SRTS, as we've discussed previously, as for an option to shuffle some money around. But I do believe that historically, only funding one tied project is not something that we have supported in the past. I think we should either seek to resolve that, or if somebody wants to waive that away, that's typically a policy decision we try to make to avoid doing that.
Mr. Chair, may I ask for a point of clarification?
Pardon me?
May I ask for a point of clarification?
Sure.
So that's under over-programming too, so there is dollars there. It's yellow, correct?
So the overprogramming actually puts us into T16, which puts us into the tied space by doing the overprogramming in that category. So that's what forces us to talk about reshuffling the carbon dollars around to either resolve the tie, because all the rest of the bike peds are funded except for the one in Victoria in Carver County.
I see, that one below, okay. On that screen.
So, for what it's worth, I think we do need to decide, since deciding on ties is something we have had to do previously, and we should try to stay consistent with that.
All right, Mayor Winchell, and then we'll go to Commissioner Holberg. Mayor?
So now that we voted on that, what if carbon reduction, we change our minds and say we want to do something different? What happens then? Can we just go back to what's there minus carbon reduction? I assume, correct?
To make a reduction, or make a recommendation with regard to the use of the carbon reduction money that's different than what's consistent with B1, is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, that- so we have to vote on whether or not we want to allocate the carbon reduction, correct?
Correct.
What happens if that were voted down, then then it's just whatever is allocated in the pink color then? All the carbon reduction projects go away?
Mr. Chair, so the carbon reduction funding is available to the Met Council. If you don't choose to use it, you lose it after a time period. So if there were a motion that to accept tax recommendations, essentially, that you do have a recommendation for the carbon reduction funds in B1 here, as you see. If that was, didn't pass, then, of course, then the next option is where do you want it to go? I'm assuming nobody from TAB would want to lose those federal dollars.
Correct.
Well, the motion is to approve the carbon reduction
Ultimately,
expenditure that's
council.
consistent with B1 scenario. That is the motion.
The motion, yes, is
Yeah.
consistent with B1, and
So if we
again,
don't,
recommendation
yeah.
to the council on this.
Correct.
So the council will,
Yeah, the council will make the ultimate decision, but we're making a recommendation, and the motion deals with recommending carbon reduction expenditures that are consistent with B1, scenario B1. Commissioner Ulrich.
Yeah, I had, he called on me. Just wait. I'm just wondering how the council would feel about if we were to say, we'll over-program to $5.5 million of carbon and fund that tide, the second half of that tie. In other words, allocate 5.5 million more than the 2 years. And take away this tie issue.
Works.
Works for me too.
Well, if we'd have done that, then the other motion could have passed, so I don't think we can do that. If you
Well,
put
we've
it-
been
if you
told
put
that the
it-
carbon is a separate issue that we.
This is not regional solicitation money.
Correct.
This is separate money.
It's a recommendation.
And that's why it's a
You
recommendation.
still could have proposed that in another project, that could have changed that.
We can make the recommendation we want to make to the Metropolitan Council with regard to the use of those carbon reduction funds. We have a motion on the table that requests that we use those carbon reduction funds in a manner consistent with the decision we just made, which was to adopt scenario or recommend scenario B1. So to answer Commissioner Ulrich's question, can you answer that question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So that's something, like, I think you laid it out pretty well. The TAB is making a recommendation here, so if they wanted to make that recommendation to the council, I think that they could. And the council would have the decision-making authority to say, we're only doing 2 years of funding, or in this case, two and a half years of funding on the carbon reduction. So, like I said, this is a recommendation coming to them, and so I think that's possible, yeah.
Or could I make an amendment to this carbon scenario? We're already considering the 2 years of
Always
carbon.
amend
Can
the
I
motion.
amend it to 2 years plus 5.5 million?
You can okay. Wait a minute. I got too many sidebar things going here. Restate what you would like your amendment to be. We'll see if we get a second on
Well,
it.
that we fund 2 years of carbon reduction plus 5.5 million to be allocated to this 16th project for the 5.5 million, the additional 5.5.
To be allocated how?
To this.
Tide project.
Member Geisler pointed out that there were 2 tide projects at number 16. One, that the 16th project that is not getting funded that's tied is a $5.5 million project. So I'm making an amendment to fund the 2 years plus the 5.5 million to fund the 16th, the second 16th, the other tide project. Is that clear?
So, who made the motion?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's an amendment or a replacement.
There's a motion
There
on the
wasn't a
floor.
motion on the floor, Mr. Chair, yes.
Well, wait, we need a second on the amendment, and then we'd have to vote on the amendment.
Isn't it a motion to amend the original motion?
Yes, it's a
I
motion
would
to
second
amend.
that.
Okay, second.
It's been seconded.
Page 13 on our materials.
Yes, we got it.
Okay, we've got a motion to amend
Mr.
the
Chair.
original motion as stated by Commissioner Ulrich.
Mr.
Just
Chair.
to fund, just again, make sure we got it clear, fund.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, I think an appropriate way to look at this is that they recommend the carbon reduction that is consistent with B1, and then take the next step to make a recommendation that there would be an additional 5.5 million. That way, it's very clear that you're good with B1 and that you're further recommending that there be a consideration for the additional 5.5 million. Because, again, the council, it's at their discretion how these carbon funds are being used. You guys are making a recommendation. That way, it doesn't come across as it's all or none.
Commissioner Ulrich, are you satisfied with that, or you want to?
Yeah, I'll be satisfied.
All right. Commissioner Holberg, you're okay too, if you take that approach that staff recommends?
I agree with the recommendations of the staff, the mechanics of where we're at now, and that we have an amendment to the original motion before that's been seconded. There's some parliamentary
Yes.
procedures here that I think if
We're going to see if you wanted to
Commissioner
withdraw.
Ulrich will
He can withdraw.
withdraw his amendment to the original motion.
That's what I was asking without actually asking it.
And then we'll have a second vote on the
I'll
second
withdraw
part.
that motion, and then I'll make it after
Right. You withdraw your amendment?
my motion.
Yeah, that's why I asked you
My
if you were
amendment, yes.
comfortable with withdrawing the second. Okay. All right. Any further discussion on the original motion as stated, using the carbon reduction funds, to recommend the use of the carbon reduction funds to the Met Council, that would be consistent with scenario B1. All right. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Commissioner Ulrich.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to fund $5.5 million more from the carbon money to fund the Three Rivers Park District project that was tied at 16th on the bike and ped category. Is that clear?
What were there were two projects tied.
Well, the one was Scott County, that's already
Okay.
included, but there was, Member Geisler pointed out that there's an issue with a tied project, and so I'm recommending that we fund $5.5 million more of carbon money to fund that second 16th project.
Okay. All right, let me restate the motion if I can.
175.
The motion would be to recommend to the Metropolitan Council that they expend an additional $5.5 million in carbon reduction funds for the purpose of funding both the Three Rivers Park project in Hennepin County and the Scott County Merriam Junction Regional Trail, Minnesota.
No, that first one is already funded.
Okay, all right.
The second
one
one
below
is.
it.
Just fund
second
just fund the
one.
Hennepin County one.
Just
All right,
Hennepin, yeah,
very
just-
good.
And I second it.
Got a second from
This would be the Three
Commissioner
Rivers.
Matas Castillo. So the motion again, folks, is that we recommend to the Metropolitan Council that $5.5 million in future carbon reduction funds be used to fund the Three Rivers project in Hennepin County.
Mr. Chairman?
Further discussion. Commissioner?
Well, Mr. Chairman, when would it be appropriate, again, going from the midpoint option to the B1 option, a pedestrian facility in Carver County drop off from the midpoint
What's he talking about?
to the PED, B1, we got dropped off. Could I amend the motion to say 7.5 million? Again, Mr. Chairman, the mysticism of how this happens. It went to a pedestrian, bike ped heavy plan, and Carver County dropped one.
Sure, you're asking, is that possible to amend the motion? I think it is. The point I think we'd make is that if you approve the motion, you know, we'd be using the money now, and then you'd forego it next cycle if we were to put the money into the solicitation for carbon reduction, which is fine, but just as, you know, there's opportunity cost of funding projects now, which may be great, versus later.
Mr. Chair.
So, but that, to your point, there is one project, and I circled it on the screen, I think Commissioner Workman, what he's asking about.
I know, but this was to take care of the tie that we almost always,
This is to deal with a tie.
that we always take the tie and do something with it. And so this is this. So this is our regional approach. This is starting to cherry pick projects, which everybody would like to cherry pick a project and put on there. I would too. So I really think that we should just move on with breaking the tie and not add the other. You didn't make that.
You made the motion.
I'll make that a motion if I can get a
Yeah,
second.
well, you did, I think.
But Mr. Chairman, I mean, it depends on what side of a cherry pick you think you're on. So somebody cherry picked us off, we're the only ones. So, I mean, cherry picking kind of goes both ways once in a while.
Yeah, it's off because of scoring too.
I'll second the motion.
You're not tied with those other projects.
Yeah, you're not.
I understand that.
I'm seconding that.
Did you, who seconded?
I seconded Workman's amendment,
All right.
amended motion.
Again, Mr. Chairman, let me emphasize that we moved from the blue to the
I know.
red to the pedestrian, bike, heavy, and we were on in the blue, we're off. It's just that
See it, so if we
it's,
vote it down.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. We got an amendment to the main motion. And the amendment to the main motion is that we agree to recommend to the Metropolitan Council that additional carbon reduction funds be used to fund the project that Commissioner Workman articulated in Carver County. And it was seconded by Commissioner Schulte. Any further discussion?
What is the project,
It's a project in Victoria,
and is it what kind
the
of?
pedestrian project in Victoria that,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just very briefly, Laconia is kind of tied in by Carver Park, Three Rivers Park. It's downtown, sits right by that park. Highway 5, busier every day, the same one that I've been talking about further to the east. And all the residential is to the south.
They had it here and they don't.
It's a very active downtown,
Yeah, right here.
with the residential to the south side of Highway 5, and that would be over Highway 5. West 78th is Highway 5.
It's way lower, it's way lower. 70%, it's way lower.
Oh, no.
you want to make a point, Commissioner?
Well, I mean, it didn't score as well. It scored in the 70 where the others were tied at 80.
All right. Member Jalali?
Well, I have a question and then a comment, but my question is that I just would like some clarification. I'm concerned about the eligibility of these funds for a project of this nature, so can someone explain just, does it fit in the category? And why is that? And then two, I do agree with Commissioner Gattel. It feels like we started this talking about a tiebreaker, and now it's kind of turning into something besides that, and I'm worried about the process. So I would like just an answer to the question and wanted to add in that comment in support of what Commissioner Gattel said earlier. Thanks.
To Member Jalali's question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So the answer to the question, this project would be eligible for carbon reduction funds. The legislation explicitly states almost all bike ped projects, almost all transit projects are eligible.
But I didn't hear anything about bike ped in the proposal, so that's why I'm confused. Is it a bike and ped
Yes.
project?
Yeah, this is a pedestrian overpass
Okay.
over Trunk Highway 5.
Okay, thank you
in
for
the city of
clarifying.
Victoria. Yep, so that's what makes it eligible. It's a ped bridge.
So, what, if we start adding these projects into the, what percentage now is like that? We're gonna blow that number completely out of the water. And we had talked about taking 8 million over 2 years of the carbon reduction. And now on 2 projects, we're taking 7 million. That, it's just doesn't seem like we're fitting what our objectives are. And generally, when there's a tie, you split the money with the project. We don't reach into the grab bag and grab more money. This is a unique situation, But generally, when there's a tie, the money got split, not new money.
Elaine?
Verify with Steve, the carbon reduction funding is not part of the calculation.
It doesn't matter, we still calculated it in, it was 23.8 prior to adding these two new projects, to B1.
The matter before us now is whether or not we're going to approve an amendment to the main motion, which was to fund the Three Rivers project, which tied with the Scott County project.
But my question ties all that together is to say.
That decision's already been made. The only thing in front of us now is whether or not we're going to add this Carver County project into a recommended expenditure category to the Met Council.
No.
We haven't voted on the first one.
No, I get it, I'm just trying to make a point of where are we going?
Any other? Member Malushnik.
Mr. Chairman, can I call a question on the amendment?
Second that.
Ken. Motion and second to call the question on this motion to amend. All those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Carried. Hand vote?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
This is just on the amendment now. You called the question, you seconded calling the question.
I did.
Why did you say no on calling the question?
You're voting on calling the question.
Yeah, okay.
You voted no to call against your own motion, or second.
We've
We've been here too long.
I know, I am,
Been here too long. All right, I think the question's called.
Yes.
All right, here we go, folks, here we go.
We're voting on
All those in favor of adoption of the amendment as proposed by Commissioner Workman, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hands, please. Opposed? Raise your hands. Motion fails, amendment fails. Back to the main motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call a question on the main amendment, or main motion.
Second.
I don't think it was necessary, but that's okay.
Well, we have.
We got voter fatigue.
Yeah.
All right, we got a, question's been moved and seconded, call the question on the main motion. All those in favor of voting on the main motion and calling the question, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, all those in favor of adoption of the main motion, the principal motion, which was to recommend to the Metropolitan Council the expenditure of carbon reduction funds on the Three Rivers Park District project at some future time. Everybody say aye.
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 In favor of the motion, say aye.
You didn't have the dollar amount.
5.5 million.
Okay. Can you redo that? Because I didn't get it.
Into a motion to
Whatever they want.
add 5.5 million to the carbon reduction funding recommendation to the Metropolitan Council to fund the Three Rivers Park District project in Hennepin County. All those in favor of that motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries.
No division?
Okay, we got one more to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is item 22-47, and this is related to the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is a solicitation process that MnDOT runs in consultation with the Met Council. And so what you have before you is a recommendation. MnDOT requests the approval of the attached 38 projects that were selected through this program, which overall equals the total funding available was about 63 million for safety projects, 19 total, 11 of those being proactive and 8 being reactive. And again, those are projects that are solicited basically at the same time as the original solicitation, but they go to MnDOT, and it's MnDOT's funds that the council is recommending approval of to move forward. So the motion in front of you is to recommend approval of the attached 38 projects for funding through the HSIP program and the inclusion of the inclusion into the 24 to 27 tip.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All right. Very good. We got a motion and second to recommend to the Met Council the approval of the 38 projects attached to the motion for funding to the Highway Safety Improvement Program solicitation and inclusion of all urbanized area projects in the draft 2024 through 2027 TIP. I think the total's what, close to $50 million worth
Close
of
to
roadway
60,
projects?
yeah.
All through the metropolitan area?
All throughout the metropolitan area, I guess.
There's some salve for the folks that love day. Any further discussion? Those in favor of adoption of Action Transmittal 2022-47 in the form stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And then, folks, let's not forget, we got, you want to talk a little bit about corridors of commerce? That's another good roadway expansion.
Sure, Mr. Chair, so.
Capability we've got here.
One other area for folks, and Mike Barnes had already mentioned it, the solicitation for corridors of commerce is open till the end of the month. Corridors of Commerce is a program that's really initiated by the legislature, facilitated by MnDOT, in which I believe at this point, it's city, county, townships can recommend projects for the trunk highway system that would improve freight, improve capacity. That's the general consensus of where that lines up around based on the state statute. And again, that ends November 30th. I think the intent is that would be selected before the legislature adjourns for the year next year.
And did you say that was 100 million?
It's approximately 100 million in the metro. The rules around it are based on a soft 50-50 Greater Minnesota Metro. And so it really depends upon what the projects are and what the total amounts are moving forward.
Good, thank you. Folks, anybody else have anything for the good of the order from a tab member standpoint? Commissioner?
That one chart, I'd like us in the future to look at that one chart that basically indicated that like Dakota County would be shocked to learn that they submitted 7 transit projects and got 5 funded according to that chart. They're not part of MBTA. MBTA services Dakota County, but it counted them as submitting 5 projects. Well, that chart really gives a skewed picture. I don't know that we've used a chart like that fully to the extent it was used this time around. So I would like us to, executive committee, to look at that chart and see if that's really a valid way to present information to us.
That's okay.
Just, you know what I'm talking about?
Okay with it.
Yeah.
Member Geisler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be the exact opposite of that. As a citizen of a city or a county, I don't care who submitted it. Whether it's in my area is what matters. And what, regional balance, we've chosen county as our magic way of doing that. We've talked about other ways of doing it. Right now, where the project sits is where the money goes. That's how we look at it. So whether the county submits or whether a city submits or whether a provider that services that area submits, I think the money by county is the appropriate way to look at that.
I'm not asking for conclusion. I'm just saying, could you look at that and discuss it, debate it?
All right, we'll make that part of the conversation. In fact, to the extent we've had this great conversation today, and it has caused everybody to think about different things that are important relative to the regional solicitation, put those in writing while they're fresh in your mind and send them to Elaine, because this is a work in progress. We're constantly trying to improve and refine this whole regional solicitation process. Strengths and weaknesses have been pointed out today in the process, and we want to make sure that we keep getting it better and better, and we want it to be right.
A survey will be sent out too after this.
Okay. And Member Malushnik, you had something?
I think it was covered, Mr. Chair. I thought the discussion about whether the counties should select, or everybody collectively in their county should select priorities. I was told by a former Met Council representative that would never work because nobody ever trusts anybody, but yeah, I don't know. It would be kind of nice to know. I've seen some projects that were slipped in there, nobody knew where they came from and all that kind of stuff, and I don't think strategically that's such a good idea, and pay the taxpayers' money. But again, maybe we should talk about that a little bit, or somebody should talk about that a little bit. I know in Denver, Dr. Cog, all the counties caucus about projects before they go to their solicitation process, and they come up with some agreements. So again, I guess I understand what you're saying, so.
Well, thanks, everybody, for a great discussion today, and
Got it, didn't bring my
The civility of it was loud and clear. Thank you very much.
That was nice.
It's your law school.
Oh, my God.